It's good day to brew, baby. What is up, YouTube? It's your boy Millsy. Back with Hometown Commander, back for another episode of Millsy Brews, the show where I brew a version 1.0 deck list of the commander in front of us on my quest to brew the magic world. You know the motto, baby. It's ABB, always be brewing, and that's what we're back to do today. The deck list is going to be down in the description for you below. As always, I'd really appreciate it if you could interact with this video, like, comment, subscribe, consider checking out those links in the description. The Discord's been popping lately, and I'd love for y'all to come join. But today, we actually already covered Zurgo Stormrender back for pre-con week. But truthfully, the more that I looked at the deck afterwards, the more I felt like there could be some changes made. Mainly, what I wanted to do is add a little bit more to the budget, kind of get into a little bit more of the aristocrats, try to juice it up a little bit. Not only that, but just go back and make sure that I liked my picks for things. And some things changed. You can juxtapose this list to the one that we put out a couple weeks back, and you could see it. But truthfully, we're just trying to get more and more value from those tokens dying. Whether they be during combat, when we get a card, or when they die, whether it be after that, or any other time when we can use them with various sack outlets to drain opponents for hopefully multiple life with our aristocrat outlets. There's a lot of ways you can go about this, and I think my goal here was just to add a couple more key cards and really just make sure we hone in on value and what the deck's trying to do. But I want to say a big thank you to the channel members. Thank you so much for supporting the channel. If you're interested in seeing all of our videos just a little bit early, check it out down below. I think, to me, when I think of a deck like Zurgo and decks like Caesar and Ishin, these decks that kind of sit in the similar Mardu value range, the thing to me that always comes to mind is creatures that make tokens on attack. The reason is because you want to be attacking anyway, and these creatures just allow you to get more value every time you do it. The best ones are ones like ones like the three of them that are on the screen, that get you those tokens whether that creature attacks or not. That's very good because the turn they come in, they can have value. Adeline makes a 1/1 human for each opponent and has it come in tapped and attacking. An Impicall gets a counter on itself and makes a bunch of gnomes equal to its counters that are tapped and attacking. And then Enoch Strike Leader, as long as it or your commander is attacking, which, remember, Zurgo has, it has mobilized. We want it to be attacking. It makes a 1/1 goblin attacking everybody. Now, Strike Leader adds the bonus of being able to sack itself to give all of our tokens indestructible. But I think, again, these are three nice, really good pieces to start. Creatures that can make token on our attack and give us more opportunities for tokens to die and leave the battlefield to get us either a counter or some damage. Arabella just makes a ton of sense in a shell like this. Remember, all those warriors are 1/1, so Arabella has a hot chance to be able to chunk our opponents for 5-6 damage minimum, on an average mobilized board. Just allowing us to get that damage in every way that we can. I like Bone Karen Butcher. It's a card I think that even if you never use its mobilized, is probably still worth it. Giving all your tokens Death Touch is going to really have your opponents have to decide if they're going to chump block them or not. And if they don't chump block them, well, that's fine. Then they just die after combat, and then you still get your life drain, right? I think the Butcher is just kind of interesting for that. It also is a nice mobilized too, so it's not a bad body on its own, but I think the Death Touch can be really useful. I talked in the first Zurgo video about Caesar and whether or not I was going to play Caesar or Zurgo. I think I'm still pretty firmly on the Caesar side. We talked about it earlier this week. I really like the deck, but I think Caesar makes a ton of sense here. On attack, you sack another token. If you do, you choose to make 2 soldiers, draw a card and lose a life, or dome somebody for X, where X is the number of creature tokens you control. Caesar still feels really good here because you can sack one of the warriors you just made that was attacking if you want to draw you a card. Or you just sack one of your other tokens that are laying around to get the drain. Either way, you have some value on that. You're making more, you're doling out damage, you're drawing cards, and Caesar's just a great body in its own right as a 4-mana 4/4. This page is basically 3 of probably my favorite abilities that we have access to in these colors, especially in this go-wide token attacky type format. The centerpiece of these 3 is Ishin, of course. If a creature attacking calls a triggered ability of a permanent we control to trigger, it goes off additional time. Mobilize is a triggered ability, so it will go off twice for every creature that has mobilized. But Flanked on either side are creatures that are going to help get damage through as we attack. Severina Rain says whenever she attacks, each opponent loses X, where X is the number of other attacking creatures. Mishra just says whenever we attack in general, each opponent loses X and we gain X, where X is the number of attacking creatures. Mishra's a little bit better because it doesn't have to attack for the ability. But both are very good at what they do, allowing us to just really push that damage into our opponents, allowing them to have to take that damage before we even get to combat, before we even get to chump blocking, before we even get to all of that, and help us just grind our opponents down. Mural and Voice of Victory both stop our opponents from at least at minimum casting spells during our turn. Mural adds the extra things about abilities, but both of them have the ability to make tokens for us. Mural makes soldiers equal to the number of soldiers we control, which at least she is a soldier, so you'll get at minimum 1 to start. Voice of Victory just has that mobilize trigger, which again isn't bad. I think Voice and Mural at minimum are here just to protect us in our turn. There's going to be those turns where we need to play a key piece and get into combat, and they're going to stop our opponents from interrupting it with most things as we do that. Redoubled Stormsinger is one of those cards that may look kind of odd on paper, but I think it's one of those cards that's going to see a ton of upside in our deck. Whenever this creature attacks, for each creature token that entered the battlefield this turn, create a tapped and attacking token that's a copy of that token, and at the next end step, sack them. The fun part about Stormsinger to remember is that the way you can stack your triggers on your combat, you can have everything else that makes a token trigger first, dump all the tokens into play, and Stormsinger is just going to effectively double all the tokens you just made. Note that it says this turn, so if you did make any tokens in your main phase, you would get copies of them. But what I think Stormsinger is going to do most of the time is copy every single attack trigger that just made tokens, and now you have way more tokens that have a chance of dying, drawing you cards, or dealing you damage at the end of the turn. Infantry Shield gives a creature menace and mobilize X, where X is its power. Again, another great piece to put on to get more of those warriors, to get more of those creatures in and going. Rosette's just a card I really like for these Mardu attacky decks. Whenever the equipped creature attacks, you get a 2/2 warrior token with vigilance that's attacking, and then all your creatures get menace. Again, just making them harder to block. And truthfully, you may not think like menace is all that much, but it can be a big difference between your creatures getting chump block and dying and getting through for damage. Especially if, remember the way that we stack our triggers, this could be our last trigger, giving everything that just got made, all the other stuff, all of it menace, and getting in for better damage. Breath of Fury is a card that I think makes a ton of sense in the deck, obviously, but I think might see some play now with a lot of these more decks rolling around. You might see it more often in Commander. So you enchant a creature you control. Whenever that creature deals combat damage to a player, you sack it and attach it to another creature you control. If you do, untap all creatures and there's another combat. This, with abilities that make tokens, especially tokens with haste, can be a really big deal. Breath of Fury at minimum can get you 1 combat, which could be enough, right? Depending on how many of these effects you have. Caesar, Arabella, Commissar, Mishra. With just one of them, another combat could be enough to really end the game. Or not end the game, but push yourself towards ending the game. But truthfully, I think it matters, and there are scenarios where you can make enough tokens to just continually hit your opponents and take infinite combats. It's a lot harder to set up, but I think Breath of Fury is one of those cards where at minimum it's going to get you 1 combat, and at maximum this could just get you so much value. I think the other thing that I truthfully didn't pay off enough on the first brew and we had to fix was ETB triggers. There are so many cards in our colors that pay off creatures coming in. Things like General Crete dealing with damage to each opponent, Mirkwood dealing a damage to each opponent whenever we create or sacrifice a token, just allowing us to get those damage in. Elspeth I kind of just put here because it doubles the amount of tokens we make. I love it. I like her +1 to give you 2 extra soldiers that turn. I like her 0 to put a counter on all your creatures to give them flying. This is one of those abilities that if you paired with Breath of Fury could be huge, especially into somebody who doesn't have any flyers to guarantee you one of those pushes through. But I added Perforos in. I think it makes a ton of sense. 2 damage every time a creature comes in. It won't take very many combats for you to start to see how this pinging of damage to each opponent every time a creature comes in can just really work for us as we push towards taking over the game in combat. Of course, War Leader's Call adds that +1/+1. But again, just damage when creatures come in is going to be really useful for us. I think we do want sack outlets. I know this sounds odd because You either want your creature to die in combat to draw a card, or when it goes to end step to die. But remember that only the warriors themselves are forced to be sacrificed, right? Almost every other ability that we have to make tokens, those tokens don't just automatically go away. And it's important to remember that Zurgo does not care if they're warriors that die to its, to that die to the mobilize trigger. It just cares about tokens leaving the battlefield, not during combat. So I think these sack outlets can be really important to, one, potentially get other value from our tokens dying, and two, making the triggers off. The biggest card I added was Phyrexian Altar. I think this is one of those cards in a deck like ours that can allow us to have access to mana at instant speed, to protect our board, to have other things, and just continue to get those Zurgo triggers. Remember that Zurgo doesn't care about a creature dying or leaving the battlefield on our turn. It just says whenever it leaves. So we can get the Zurgo triggers on somebody else's turns. But you have a thing like Bartolome that grows itself whenever we sack a creature. Yahenni can give itself indestructible by sacrificing another creature. We can do that as many times as we want to. And it grows whenever our opponent's creatures die. Or things like Skull Clamp, where we can clamp a creature to potentially draw a couple cards if it doesn't have any buffs. And then the big one that I think can be really important is Goblin Bombardment. We can sack a creature to deal damage to any target. It may not seem like a lot, right? 1 to any target's a whole lot different than 1 to each opponent. But remember that 1 damage is something that's not a lot, but when you can repeat it multiple times, let's say I make 8 or 9 tokens in a turn, you're taking your token that you want to die anyway. Zurgo's dealing 1 to everybody because we're ideally doing this outside of combat, and then you're doing 1 to somebody else, whether it be somebody or a permanent or a creature, right? There's a lot of ways to look at bombardment, but I think it's one of those cards that can really take our Aristocrats game to the next level if we can see one. And speaking of Aristocrats, I think this is, again, something I didn't do enough with on the first brew, and we needed to do more. Truthfully, what really made me think about this was brewing my Caesar list for this week. I was like, man, I missed out on a lot of opportunities for Zurgo, and so we came back. I had something like a La Silcor in the original list. Whenever one of our creatures comes in, we gain a life. Whenever another creature we control dies, each opponent loses a life. Again, this classic Aristocrats pain our opponents when our creatures die. Same thing with the Apprentice. I'm pretty sure I had it in our original list. And whenever another creature or artifact we control is put in the graveyard from the battlefield, each opponent loses a life, so, whenever they die. But the light bulb moment I had in Caesar was cards like Mahadi. Whenever, beginning of each end step, we make a treasure for each creature that died this turn. Well, we want our creatures to die. Why not take the free treasures? That's more mana for future turns. That's more mana to cast removal, protection, and things like that. Same thing with Pitiless Plunder, right? Making treasures when creatures die just makes a ton of sense, especially since we want them to die anyway. Now, one of the fun Aristocrats pieces for our decks is going to be Teysa Karlov. Whenever a creature dying causes a triggered ability of a permanent we control trigger, it goes off additional time. This will double up both of Zurgo's abilities, drawing us 2 or mass pinging for 2. But I think the thing that I like about Teysa the most isn't the doubling up death triggers. I think that's a really great ability, but just giving our creature tokens lifelink is really nice. That way, if they do die in combat, at least we're still getting some life back from them dying. We're dealing damage and we're getting life back for it. And now every token is a threat, right, in combat. And then Zulaport, again, just another copy of that classic Aristocrat style ability. We added a couple more. I do not recall if Grave Pact was in the original list, but I added it whenever a creature we control dies, each other player sacrifices a creature. Grave Pact does not take very long to really put its hands around a game when we have 4 tokens die into a combat where maybe our opponent's creatures already died, maybe they didn't. Now everybody has to sack 4, and you're going to really start eliminating your opponent's boards very quickly as all of our creatures hopefully stay safe. Bash, remember, it's, again, that classic Aristocrat's ability just on an enchantment. And then I wanted to add in Meat Hook. I really like Meat Hook. It's an expensive card, but it's really worth its value. It's a board wipe when it comes in, giving everybody -X/-X, and that might think that to be odd, because why would we want our own things to die? But remember, almost all of our Aristocrats' abilities want our own things to die in order to ping our opponents. Not only that, but Meat Hook gives us another Aristocrat ability, saying whenever a creature we control dies, each opponent loses 1. But also, whenever a creature opponent controls dies, we gain 1. So you could start to see where Meat Hook can really add in some value for us as it sits out. And even a well-timed Meat Hook for enough to wipe the board is still good because it can lead to so much value. And this bottom 2 abilities just stick around for us to use as an Aristocrat's payoff. But I've said it before on the show, and I'll say it again. No deck's ever complete. Even though we came back and took another gander at Zura, I still think in testing there's a lot more that we can learn. Mainly, do we have enough Riskrets type things to pay off tokens? I thought about Kumbal, having everybody lose one and we gain one whenever one or more tokens enter, just due to how many of those attack triggers we have, and we can potentially make a copy of the tokens our opponents make. Just truthfully, I was trying to find stuff for other slots. It's the same thing as something like Dollmaker Shop. This is probably one of my favorite cards that's been released last year. Making you tokens whenever you attack, and then once you get enough mana, just making all your creatures huge. I like the shop, but truthfully, I was just trying to figure out how do I fit all the slots in for the things I want. It and Cathar's Crusade are probably cards I would want to consider bringing back in, especially if I notice my lack of punching through if the Aristocrats isn't enough. I think both of these cards add just some brutal options to punch through harder into your opponents, and create more of a threat than just I'm making tokens and I'm going to sacrifice them. But let's get into what we love to do on the channel the most, and let's get into our playtests. Remember, the goal of playtests on the channel is not to find magical Christmas land. It's not to show off our best plays, but it's to get into our game plan and start to understand functionally, how our deck works. Here we're keeping a 3-lander with Soul Ring, Talisman, Mishra, and an Infantry Shield. This is probably one of the better hands I can think of. We can get potentially Zurgo down nice and early, potentially here. I'm thinking on turn 2. And no, we are 1 black source away from getting it. Well, I guess we have the Shattered. Yeah, we are literally just a black source away from casting Zurgo on turn 2. But I think we still run everything out, get everything in. Of course, the hope there was an untapped black source, but it's not. So I think we just go ahead and get that down there and get the shield down. Again, we're still in great shape. We're deploying so many great permanents. 3 for Zurgo here. We've got 3 left. We could put the shield on it, for next turn when it's able to attack. And then now, 7 mana. Mishra is 4. I believe we'd still be able to... Did we use this last turn? 3 to bring Zurgo in. 3 to attach. I think we should have cracked that last turn for a swamp, just to be safe. Because if we had done that, now I can go this, hold up Boros Charm to protect our board. Attack with Zurgo. We're making 3 warriors off of the Infantry Shield. And we're making 1 off of Zurgo's ability. If they die in combat, great. But remember, we have a Mishra trigger here that we're going to have go off after both of Zurgo's abilities. That's 5 creatures attacking. Everybody's going to lose 5, or we're going to gain 5. And then if these die in combat, great. At best case, we get to draw 4 cards. Let's say we only draw 3, right? And 1 dies at the end of combat, or end of turn. Great. We still refilled our hand. We still have access to some great things. Now, I think Adeline just makes the most sense. There could be an argument for Tempt with Vengeance. We go into Tempt for 7 here. That is going to give us a Mishra trigger of 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. I mean, that's a huge Mishra trigger, especially with all of those elementals attacking. But I mean, I think Adeline's just as good, getting her down and getting humans on attack. And then Adeline's probably my favorite Infantry Shield target because it can just make a ton of warriors, right? Since its power grows for each creature we control. I think we're pretty safe to stop here because, truthfully, either our opponent has removal and we're holding up that Boros Charm to try to protect the board. And, all we need is probably 1 or 2 turns from that, including this turn from that point, to just really take over the game. Here on playtest number 2, we keep it a 4-lander with Mardu, Siegebreaker, Perforos, and an Impicol. Siegebreaker is a really interesting card. Whenever it comes in, you can exile up to 1 other target creature you control until it leaves the battlefield, and then whenever it attacks, you basically get to get a copy of it attacking each player. It's interesting. I'm still trying to find, those perfect creature choices for it. But here I'm just thinking the Marsh, it's going to just allow all the other lands to get a little bit better if it comes in tap. Turn 2, I don't think we have anything too good. Turn 3, we see Renewed Solidarity. This is a very interesting card. So it comes in, we're going to choose Warrior, obviously. Give all of our Warriors +1/+0. It says, beginning of our end step, for each token you control of the chosen type that entered this turn, create a token that's a copy of it. This is fun because Solidarity is actually going to make warriors, a copy of the warriors that don't have to be sacrificed, basically allowing us to net more tokens around, which can be used on future turns, right, to die to fuel our scratch. Ooh, here we see Mirkwood Bats. This is a decent choice. I could go for Adeline for more raw tokens. Go to right for Perforos for more damage. Mirkwood Bats would get me some decent damage. Remember, we sacrifice those warriors at the beginning of the next end step. My thoughts almost Adeline, because it presents the more tokens on board. You know, maybe we draw 2 and a couple die on end step. And then now, man, the Rosette's great, but I'm kind of thinking Perforos, because now we're going to get 8 damage between the Adeline and the Zurgo. Again, do it again. Maybe we get a couple on our hand from that and a couple other damage there. And now we don't really care about when they die, because truthfully, we're getting so much damage on them coming in. But I think we just doubled down, you know, Mirkwood Bats for damage on them coming in. Play the Rosette for next turn. Could I have turned Perforos on? No, I couldn't have this turn. I guess a Nimbicol couldn't have been bad to start growing, but I think truthfully we're good here. Mirkwood's going to get us 4 damage on enters, and then 4 damage when they die, or 1 damage from each warrior that dies, and then Perforos still dealing 8. So you're talking about 12 damage just on our normal attacks, which again, adding up over a turn or 2 is just going to get really hard for our opponents. Well, let's go into playtest number 3. The 3-lander with the Phyrexian Altar, Solidarity, Arabella, and Warleader's Call. So kind of interesting. I think we want to work towards getting... My thought would be Arabella here down on 2, so that way she could start attacking, right? Turn 3, I think it's Zurgo, right? We can have Arabella attack, but like truthfully, we're not gaining that much value, right, from Arabella attacking. Turn 4, we see the Siegebreaker again, but it seems like more and more that I do these playtests, the Siegebreaker doesn't seem to have the right things, so maybe it might be worth taking out, now that I think about it. If I play the Altar this turn, I'm making 1 token, I can sack it for mana, effectively giving me 2 more mana. Or, you know, 2 extra mana, other than, you know, so 1 extra mana, 5 total. We could do Warleader's Call, get Arabella a little bit harder to block. We could do the Solidarity, just getting us an extra warrior, try to go better turn over turn. We could get Severina Rain down, right, and try to make this attack better next turn, which I don't think seems like a terrible idea. You still get the attack and the drain there from Arabella. Now with 5 mana, this is going to get us 3 at the moment for its trigger. We could do Warleader's Call. We could do Solidarity just to, again, get some better value. I'm kind of thinking Warleader's Call for that extra damage. Attack, damage when it comes in, 4 on Commissar's trigger, a couple on the Arabella trigger. We haven't seen as much of the great pieces, right? Like Adeline or some of those that make more tokens on attack. Here we've got the Flare of Fortitude. We now got multiple creatures to sack to it. I think it's just like Solidarity plus the Altar here. And go ahead and attack, get the warrior. We really want the warrior to live to get us another warrior with Solidarity, but it can also be a mana. This one's a little bit rougher. I think on the playtest, we didn't see as many of our value pieces, especially our attacking token makers, right? And that's something that we think about if that's an experience we have often, right? That's maybe something we think about in changing things in the deck. But let's get into our last playtest. Keep it a 2-lander with Arcane Signet. Bartolome is a sack outlet, Teysa, Pitiless Plunder, and Grand Crescendo. So we've got some interesting ways here. We've got would make tokens. We got some ways to profit tokens dying. I think we just work our way up here. Turn 3. Okay, we can get that next talisman down and Zurgo. Just getting Zurgo's right process ready to go. Here on turn 4, my thought was Pitiless plus Bartolome. My thought here is make the warrior. I can sack the warrior to Bartolome at any time just to get a treasure. So if somebody blocks it, that would actually draw me a card. Do that, and which I think is probably the literal ideal, what we'd want, right? Draw the card, counter on Bartolome, get the treasure, and now this is an engine that's going to be really nice once we can start putting more tokens down. 7 mana, I like the idea of something like Zulaport. Love the idea of something like Teysa to get us more draws. Or we could just keep the mana open and go for the crescendo. Again, do the same thing we did last turn, drawing us a card and making us treasures, because my thought here is if I can crescendo for like 6, that's so many extra tokens now that I can pay off dying with triggered abilities, Teysa giving them things. I think there's just a lot of ways to look at what we could do. If we were trying to do something this turn, I think it's Teysa, right? Getting the extra card draw, and then we could do something like the Cutthroat as well, or the Rain before combat. If we want to set up for future turns, I kind of like the idea of, again, just doing the crescendo for a ton of citizens. We'll be looking at 3, 4, like 6 citizens. Because now my thought is, and I'd do that on the turn before my turn, because now my thought is these are all Aristocrats threats, and they're all mana because of the Plunderer, right? Because I can sack them here to grow, right, Bartolome. So as we come into our turn, 7 mana plus 6 citizens, which could effectively be 6 more mana. I'm thinking like what? Zulaport, Solidarity. Put him into the Bartolome for a treasure for 9 for Teysa. Now, got a couple life lost there with Zurgo and Zulaport. We go into combat, get the warrior, right? And so now in combat, if I sack these tokens during combat, I'm getting what? 1, 2, 3, 4 life loss each for each of the tokens for 8, 12, 16, 20, 24. And like Bartolome could get better. We're getting 12 treasures, right? Because each of them is going to make 2 treasures from the Pitiless Plunderer. And I think now we've just got enough mana to make us happy. The question is just, where do we go to close out the game? The only downside of only seeing one mobilizer is that this Solidarity is going to be a little tough. We probably should just keep this warrior around so that we're always getting one back, right, every turn with the Solidarity. But, like, truthfully, 20 damage is still plenty enough. And we could then still get the Rain down this turn, setting up for next turn. I think we're still just in good shape. But I'd love to know, what do you think of the second version of Zurgo? Again, I think it's just a little bit better. The budget's gone up. We've got some better Aristocrats pieces. And I'm just overall, I'm a little bit happier where the deck's at. But I'd love to know what you think, and I will catch you on the next one.